participants. Easy. Oh, Debbie's looking to figure it out.
Adentro los zapatos.
Sorry, we speak English, Debbie. Only English.
Morning.
Good morning, Nancy. How are you?
Good. How are you?
Amazing. I've never been better in my whole life. What?
You're gonna. I know you're gonna tease it here, and then you're gonna make this so I can see. They can see it.
Lots of good things. Cold. Just got cold. We have a great snowstorm coming.
Yes. Not for me.
Oh, yeah, you look like you're somewhere warm.
I'm in Florida.
Oh,
Eso no
what?
tú puedes ir en
Go
esa
out of the Zoom
que
right
viene
now.
del Javino. No puede todo ir ahí o no.
I'm kicking you out of the
Like
Zoom
this
because
is
you're in
the-
Florida. It's not okay. It's not fair.
Well, you should be happy I'm in the Zoom because I'm in Florida.
There you go, by the way. What part of Florida are you in?
Boynton Beach.
Nice. Are any Jews there?
Oh my God, yeah.
Yeah. By the way, I've been told that I'm about old enough to go head to Florida now, like full time. You know, I'm the grandfather. That's right. That's it.
You're a grandfather?
Who told you you were a grandfather, Rabbi?
You'd be surprised what people think.
I
Maybe
can't
I'm
believe
with
it.
an I or a Y. Okay, we're just okay. People are. I'm admitting left and right. This is really good. Seven 33. Jeffrey.
Coming.
Hi, Gail. Good morning.
Good morning.
We
Sorry.
have to change your screen name. You always says Jeffrey Toll. You know.
I know. I don't know how to change it. I'm not smart enough to figure it out. I apologize.
That's
Very
smart.
easy.
Good
You need to have kids around like to do this, right?
You have to do it before you come in.
You can do
Before
it
you
now.
enter the room.
Maybe let me see if I can do it for you. Let me just see something. Hold
Oh.
on. Watch this. Watch what I'm going to do here. Oh yeah, here we go.
Oh, good.
There we go. How about that? I'm going to record now. Okay, everybody can
Rabbi?
hear me? Okay. So we're going to just do a little bit of Mikeitz and then a little bit of Chanukah. I hope, obviously, this Chanukah. I hope everybody's having an enjoyable Chanukah. Chag Sameach, everyone. And continuing where we left off last week, where we talked about the sale or the alleged sale of Yoseif and who was responsible for that. Okay.
Put this in.
Okay. So we don't know. And this is so what this is also a lot of Rabbi Foreman, but it's based on something from that was years ago by Rav Yoel ben Nun. Rav Yoel ben Nun, he's one of the great Tanakh teachers, experts of modern times, but he was also one of the characters featured in like Dreamers. If you've read that book, which deals with the the events of the 6-day war and the paratroopers, etc. So he's there and in the Gush. So and the people who went back to the Gush, it's very it's kind of like really modern history. And this is something that he brought to light. So there's a few, I guess, in Tanakh, certainly in Bereshis, we have a few looming questions. You've heard me use that term before, looming questions, sort of like really big, like I don't have a great answer to these questions and they really bother me. So one of them is, how come God doesn't let Moshe go into Israel? It's a looming question. It's not fair. It's not right. Come on, really? Hit the rock, speak to the rock, look to the rock, smell the rock. Come on, like really, it's not fair, and that's a tough one to swallow. Or comparing, as we've seen the Cheder Egel and the Meraglim, the sin of the golden calf versus the sin of the spies. Why 40 years? All kinds of answers. But the more answers you see to one question shows you how much people really struggle with the question itself, and then we come up almost with some answers that are so esoteric or bizarre or out there that we don't even know what's going on. So there's a question here, is that by the end of this week's parsha, Yoseif, who has been sold into slavery, he's in Egypt. He does very well for himself in prison. He's a guy that he rises to the top. That's, it's a Chanukah thing. Shemen, he rises to the top. And he gets himself into more, Chedva's late. She's going to get into big trouble now. And he rises to the top. He's in prison, and he's discovered, and he's talented. He's the head of Potiphar's house. Please, just whatever we do, we're not going to point out that Vivian is late. We're not going to say a word about it. And what happens is then he's the wife of Potiphar tries to seduce him every single day until finally that costs him his freedom again, and he ends up back in prison, and then he gets back because of the dreams. Now, by the way, you realize that he ends up marrying the daughter of Eshes Potiphar. So this woman who tries to seduce him then becomes his mother-in-law. Can you imagine what that chuppah was like? Oh man, when she was walking around him 7 times, and I just can imagine. That'd be great. That's great television. Anyway, Yoseif goes up. So by well into this parsha, he's got a pretty good situation. He's a second in command in Egypt. He's saving the entire world from famine. That's why they say it's Yoseif HaTzadik, because he saves all those around him, HaTzadik, like Noah. And he is pretty powerful. At what point do you think it would have made sense for Yoseif to just pull out his little laptop and go to yaakovavinu.co.il and email him and say, Abba, I'm okay. I'm good. How you doing? Why did he never write home? Has anyone ever been bothered by this question? Good. Anyone ever heard a good answer to this question? Yeah. So Rav Yoel ben Nun put forth a novel approach, which we're going to look at, and it really makes a lot of sense because it dovetails with everything that we've been studying up until now by studying the text correctly. Now, let's look at it. We looked at it last week, the sale of Yoseif from the eyes of the brothers. Did they sell him? They didn't sell him. They wanted to sell him. They kept changing their mind. Reuven gets back, and all of a sudden, somebody else sold him. Somebody scooped in and chapped the rein, as they say, and got him and sold him before they could have a chance. And then what do? They take his coat and they send it to the father. They don't say anything to the father. They're like, is this Joseph's coat? And he's like, oh my God, that must have been a wild animal tore him apart. Okay. As far as Yoseif is concerned, what does he think happened?
He thinks Yaakov sent him and knew exactly what was going to happen.
So this is precisely the theory of Rav Yoel ben Nun. And this is you don't find it in any of the classic Mefarshim. You find it in the modern Mefarshim. So for instance, the Ramban posits a theory that Yoseif was waiting for his dreams to come true. And therefore he had to wait till the parents would come down and the brothers would come down, everybody would bow down to him this time, and that was part of the fulfillment of who he was. Okay. But it is plausible. It can make sense to think that after all, I mean, he knows that his brothers don't like him. And maybe they had some sort of conversation with the father saying, Dad, it's him or us. Like, we can't take this anymore. This is not on. This is not okay. I mean, this kid, first of all, he's 17. The kid barely has his junior license, and he's telling us what to do. He's bossing over us. He's telling on us, and he's saying we're doing things that we're not doing. I mean, Dad, come on. Really, I get it. I get it that he's, Rachel, I get it. He's the favorite, and you made him the coat. But, you think that's okay, Dad? I mean, like, look at your family. Look what happened when we favored one over the other. So Yoseif thinks that, and it's possible to think that maybe, and by the way, and he has a lot of time to think about this because he's in jail and he's in the pit and he's being moved and transported and sold and he's working and maybe he's saying, I don't know, maybe my father was in on this. Now, if you say that, it changes the entire landscape of the story, because instead of saying, why didn't Yoseif write home? The question then becomes, why would he? Like, he has completely dissociated himself from his family. It's later when they show up again, it's like all these old things come up and he has to kind of rethink and be like, oh, maybe it's not like I thought. Has that ever happened to anybody where you've gone into a situation or you've lived your life or gone through a relationship thinking that you know one thing or based on a certain premise, and then when the whole premise is pulled out from under you and you're kind of like, oh yeah, I got to look at this differently now because that's not the way this is. That's not the way this was. That's not the way this works. I'm sure we've all been through that to a degree. Okay.
Rabbi, can I ask you a quick question?
Yes.
Forgetting Jacob for a second, just a moment. What about Benjamin? Why was there no contact? He clearly wasn't in on it. He wasn't involved. Was there a reason there was no communication, at least attempted, to his brother?
I don't have, again, I don't know that what that would accomplish. I mean, maybe he does think, well, maybe if they look, he's like, if they got the father to agree to it, what's to say the father wouldn't get the youngest son to agree to it? By the way, propaganda is a very, very powerful thing, especially in families, by the way, especially in families where, you know, it's like, you know, you think someone in a certain family member of the family, and it seems like this is what we're always talking about, but that's the book of Bereshit, is all about, you know, family fights. And it's always like poison. A certain individual could be poisoned because of what people have been hearing all these years without actually ever knowing the individual. That's just the nature of the beast, okay? So it's very well possible that Benjamin is poisoned. And by the way, they make him out to be this like little kid. Like in this whole thing, he's a pawn in the story. He's like 30 years old. He has 10 kids.
Oh my God.
Ella, Vavecher, Vashbel, Gera, Naaman, Echi, Rosh, Mupim, Chupim, Ard. Those are the name of Binyamin's 10 sons. You're like, oh, that's so fancy. No, easy. Bar mitzvah parsha. Just showing up. So Benjamin is like, I don't know. It's a question. So now, but at a certain point, Joseph, in his recovery or in his sort of growing up phase, he has to then sort of find a new life for himself, and he has to find someone who's going to give him a new life. It's almost like he has to find a new family. Who is his new family? His new family is Paro Melech Mitzrayim. His new family is his new life in Egypt. And what you see here is you see some very, very interesting things. So if you have the page here, if not, I'll read it to you. On source number 1, where we have the pasuk in the beginning of our parsha, when Paro sends for Yoseif. I mean, think about like how Paro is, just look at it in this lens. Paro is the antithesis. He's the exact opposite of what happened to him with his own family. Vayishlach Paro vayikra es Yosef vayiritzu min habor vayigalach vayichalef simlosa vayavo el Paro. Paro, when they said he had these dreams, and they're like, oh yeah, I remember there was a kid who knew how to interpret dreams, right? That's what the steward says to him. And they go and they fetch Yosef, but where does it say? Where do they get him from? They get him from, and again, this is so subtle. You've read this 1,000 times, never thought about it. This is unbelievable. They take him from the bore. It says they take him from the pit. Where was Yosef? He was in prison. If you don't believe me, look at the next source. The next source, it says that when they took him, they put him Vaitenu el Beis HaSohar, Mokom Asher Esirei Melech Hasrim, Vahisham beBeis HaSohar. At the end of the parsha last week, we said, where was Joseph? He was in prison. So all of a sudden now, what is the Torah hinting at? What is the Torah trying to get you to pay attention to? When it says they freed him from the bore, they took him from the pit. What pit? By the way, maybe it's referring to the pit in the third source that we saw in chapter 37 that we saw last week, is that what happens by Yehi Kasher Ba Yosef El Echav, Vayashpitu Es Yosef Es Kutanto Es Ketonas HaPasim Asher Alav, When Yoseif came and the brothers, remember, they had seen him from far away and they're making all these plans. They're hatching and snatching and matching and doing all these terrible things. They rip off his coat and they throw him into the pit. So at that point, his whole life consisted of, he's 17, is my life is over. I've been thrown into a pit. Now, when Paro redeems him, this is when he actually becomes like something big. He had a shot before, but he got into trouble because he was so good looking. It happens. Okay, that was the original. I say this every year, but it's like my favorite thing in the world. The Tom Jones reference. You guys remember Tom Jones?
Trying not to.
Trying not to, Vivian? Come on.
Yeah.
So they say that how did he know that to marry the daughter of Potiphar, and how did he know that she was like someone he could marry? And they say that when they paraded Yoseif through town, and the women were all throwing their stuff at him. So Tom Jones had this thing that he was on stage. Women used to throw certain things at him. We don't need to say what, okay? And this woman, this daughter of Potiphar, you're way too young. You don't even. Miriam is here. Miriam Dessa's here. She's like, I don't even know who Tom Jones is. He's like, what is that? Okay, Google it up. Google it up, as Mrs. Millie Zuckerman, Zechron Levracha, always used to say. She's like, Google it up. And so they said that she threw it. She had an amulet that she was actually, according to the Medrash, she was the daughter of Dinah, the product of that terrible situation, and that's who Yoseif ended up marrying, but she's adopted by that family. Okay, fine. But anyway, Yoseif, when he finally becomes his own man, when he rises to power, when he gets to be defined, his life-defining moment is becoming the second to Paro. But what is the Torah saying? What does Paro do? They fetch him and they draw him from the pit. In other words, if that's where he was, if that's where his original family threw him, his new family takes him out of the bore. His new family takes him out of the pit. And you see this whole pattern of reversal that takes place, okay? Vayishlach Paro, vayikra el Yosef. Paro sends for Joseph, right? And he brings him to him. According to Yoseif, what has happened to him until now? He has been cast away. He's been sent away. And right now he's being brought back. Yoseif is pulled out of prison. He gets a new title. He gets a new thing. And what is one of the things that he says? Paro gives him a bunch of things, but what's the first thing that Paro asks him to do? Okay, and if you look at the source in the bottom of the page, Paro calls him. He gives him clothing. He goes to Paro, and Paro says to Yosef, "Chalom chalamti ufoser ein oso." He says, "I have dreamed a dream, and I have no interpretation." Va'ani shamati alecha leimor tishma chalom v'toroso. Now I said, I hear that you understand how to do dreams. You know dreams. You know from dreams, okay? So Paro asks Yoseif to interpret his dream. How did the whole thing start? Is that Yoseif is the one who's relating a dream. Bless you, Dina. See, I can't hear sneezes on Zoom, but I can see them. The story started with Yoseif giving a dream over and nobody being able to interpret it, and he decides to give his own interpretation, or they figure it out for yourself. And here, someone is giving a dream to Yoseif and asking him. So you have this very, very nifty chart. Again, this is from Rabbi Foreman that I took from. It's great because it's color coded. If you look at the second page, on the other side of the here I have it double sided, but what makes it good is that it's a reverse chart. But not only is it reverse, but it's also color coded to show you the reversal. Okay. You have the initial event and you have the reversal. Okay, it looks like this if you have that. Okay, the initial event is the father says chalamti chalom. He says to his father chalamti chalom, and the father says, "What? Your mother and I are going to bow down to?" We saw in the beginning of last week's parsha. So if you connect it down, I love this graphic though. It's like the little line connecting down. It's like I feel like I'm on Zoom, pre-K nursery again, because I have to do matching and the hat goes with the gloves in the winter. We should have a fun storm. But he says it's also chalom, chalamti. It's actually a reversal in the text as well. It's supposed to chalamti chalom, it's chalom chalamti. You see that? How that works? It's brilliant. I dreamed. And the son hearing the father's dream meaning his new father, his son listens to it. Whereas his was rejected by his father initially. Now the father wants his opinion. He's going to take it very seriously. And the second thing, he's sent away by his father, and now he is sent for by his new father in the blue line. In the brown line, he is, what happens when they cast him into the pit? They rip off his clothing, they tear it up, and they give it to the father eventually. Now what does his father do? His father gives him new clothes. And finally, there they threw him into a pit, and now he's from a pit. Not only that, if you one of the things that what does Paro do once Yoseif gets promoted? What is one of the things that Paro does for him? He gives him a name. He gives him a title. He gives him a nickname, Tzofnas Paneach. Now, typically, you have a new job, a new title, a new this or that in the family business. Who gives you that title? Who gives you that name? The parent figure, the boss figure of the family, the figurehead, the matriarch, the patriarch. So that's like the last thing is that Yoseif is now, oh, look, I am part of this new family, and Paro listens, he wants my opinion. He gives me clothing. He calls for me. He doesn't send me away. He gives me a title. He gives me a position. He gives me name. He recognizes my talents. And by the way, this is an old story, right? How often does someone, let's say, even left like one job to go to another job, and they realize, oh, all those years, and I was doing X, Y, and Z, and nobody ever appreciated it. And here I am. Look, now they see what I can do. So here we're just talking about a familial affiliation. And here, his new family, his new life, his new position is all about Paro and Mitzrayim. So and this all is under the roof. I think my father was in on this, even though that comes and turns out to be not to be true. As we said last week, it turns out that in the story, nobody knows what happened. Not the brothers, not the father, not Yoseif, and it's one big giant misunderstanding because of the Midianites. It's the Midianites always mess things up, right?
Also, had Joseph written his parents, wouldn't he have to reveal his identity to Paro? Like, would then he'd lose all that great life he had now?
You're suggesting that as an alternate answer?
Yeah.
Yeah, it's definitely proposed that he, maybe he liked it too much. And also sometimes, I guess there are, maybe that's our topic. One of the things we're learning tonight in our leadership class is about difficult conversations. Sometimes the path of least resistance is easier, and that, right in what? And tell them that, oh, my brother tried to kill me. And maybe we're in it, maybe you're not. I mean, what am I going to get? The bottom line is I'm here and whatever. So according to Rabbi Nun and Rabbi Foreman, it's like, this is it. Like I have a lot of time here to think about this, and I'm giving up on the old family. I'm giving up on the old world, even though, by the way, I'm still frum. Nobody uses God more than Joseph. His two things he does a lot. He says God a lot. If you look, Rabbi Bernstein spoke about this on Shabbos Mincha Shiur last week, about the presence of God in Yosef's mouth. Always, it's Shem Hashem Shogar B'ficha. That combined with that he's always crying. So he's like a sissy religious boy, something like that. I don't know. But by the way, it's all right to cry. I learned that on Free to Be You and Me. I have a pink LP album cover, and I could sing it for you. And William has a doll. And again, Miriam's looking at me like, I don't know what you're talking about. What were these children raised on? I don't know. Right? William has a doll. You know this, right? You know this? Okay. That's part of, that's, unfortunately, I listened to it way too many times.
Rabbi, I'm pretty confused too over here.
I just said Miriam. It's a generic Miriam. It's like, Miriam. One day we're going to have to educate you properly. By the way, I wouldn't even tell you to listen because you listen to it and you'd be like, this is such garbage. I can't believe that you listened to this. But when you have nothing else, when we had to, my siblings and I, we would fight over the weekend paper because we would like grab the TV listings to see what's on. We had to wait for commercials to be over to watch a show. We couldn't select what we wanted to watch. If it was on, that was it. And if the channel got the reception and you're playing, you guys have it easy. Wow. Anyway, Yoseif cries a lot. He's always talking about God. So he's still like, he gets that lesson from his parents. So he didn't disconnect from God. He disconnected from his family. which is a very interesting dichotomy, because you would think that if someone is deserting their family, they like, what do I need any of this for? Isn't that usually the case? If someone comes from, let's say, a religious home or an observant home, and they break with the family, inevitably they'll break with tradition as well. Because if the whole reason I follow tradition is because of the family, or sometimes it goes the opposite. A non-observant family, somebody breaks with the family and they become much more traditional, much more observant, right? It's like one of the worst things that happens to parents is the kid becomes really frum. It's like drives parents crazy. Whatever, I have what to say about that, but not now. Anyway, there's, when they come home from the year from Israel, they come home for Pesach and they cover your house in silver foil, so that's one of the things, right? Debbie, Mirta Hashem Bayu, Reshit Yerushalayim, here we go. Anyway, so now one of the things, if you look at the last source here, the last source, it says, Vayikra, Vayikra Yoseif Eshem HaBachor Menashe Ki Noshani Elokim Es Kol Amali Ves Kol Beis Avi V'Shem Hasheni Kara Ephraim Ki Yifrani Elokim Be'eretz Hani. When you look at it in this context of Yosef feeling isolated, Yosef leaving his real family, adopting or being adopted by a new family and assuming a new life and reversing whatever has happened to him, when you read how he names his children, it's unbelievable. Look at it, how it says now. He has two children, Ephraim and Menashe. It's Menashe and Ephraim because we're so used to this. He calls his first one Menashe. Why? God has made me forget completely my hardship and my parental home. Notice the God and notice the forgetting. And forgetting what? That part of my life is over. I am moving on. The part of my life, the parents, everything, I don't need it. Genig shoy. And the second one he named Ephraim, meaning God has made me fertile in the land of my affliction. God is, you know what? I'm a torn person. I'm really conflicted. But God has given me sort of this new life, and he's made me fertile. And his affliction may be referring to the fact that, he's trying to figure out exactly who he is. By the way, don't we spend a whole life trying to figure that out? Sometimes we actually get it. And that's what happens here. Now, what's going to happen, what's going to throw this all into a tizzy, which we're not going to see really until he sees Yaakov later on. But what happens is what happens when they show up. This is all happens before the brothers show up. Now the brothers show up and they start talking, and our father, and he lost his son, and he's inconsolable, and they don't know that they're talking to Joseph. And then Joseph is now he has to rethink everything, and he has to replay every conversation, and he has to rethink every thought. And he has to go back and say, O-M Akaji. That you probably understand, Miriam, because that's a very current reference, okay, from a movie called Pitch Perfect. What happens is, there's so much nonsense in my head, I can't even begin to tell you. What happens is that Yoseif now is rethinking and saying, wait a minute. I was working off the premise that my father was involved. I was working off the premise that my brothers hated me and had no contrition whatsoever. And then he starts to hear slowly but surely, which only goes to show you, by the way, the strength of Yoseif. This is why I think he should be called Yoseif HaTzadik. The strength is because, I don't know about you, but like if you have like a really bad family relationship or a bad any relationship, and you have the opportunity to really get back at them, I mean, you'd want to smash them. I mean, you want to crush them. Say the amount of pain that you caused me and the amount of suffering, and you would feel completely self-righteous about it, even if they felt bad. But no, he chooses to put the family back together as opposed to destroying it completely. And he's able to once again shift his paradigm. Whereas he went from family, he went to his new family. Now he goes back to his original family. That's the brilliance of Joseph. That's something that's really, really strong. It's such a strong lesson here. But I think what I just wanted to point out from this part of Mikeitz, again, a little bit of Mikeitz before we get to Chanukah, is that he goes through this reversal, and it's so subtly pointed to in the text, especially I think the one when it says bore. They fetch him from the bore. He's now, and maybe it's like the abyss of despair is that bore. The bore is very deep. can't see him there. They can't, they could hear him. They couldn't see him. They fetch him out of the abyss of despair, and they take him. And now all of a sudden he has a new life. Paro wants me. They cast me away. Paro takes me out of the pit. They threw me to the pit. Paro gives me clothes. They took care of they got rid of my clothes. Paro wants me to hear his dreams. They couldn't care less about my dreams. You know what? I've forgotten about my whole life back there until he doesn't, which just shows you that, memory is a funny thing. You remember until you don't remember until you remember again. Okay, fine. Let's look a little bit about Chanukah. And the reason we're doing it on Tuesday is because this is as I mentioned last week, this is one of the only rare times in which Chanukah does not coincide with Parshas Mikeitz. Chanukah usually does. One of the, whatever, there's all kinds of proofs in there. You could figure it out. But, we have proofs that connected to Vayeshev also. The last time this happened is 20 years ago, and it won't happen for a while. That just shows you we're in a bizarre year, as if you needed me to tell you that. One of the things that's bizarre, as I mentioned, is that Christmas Day, Haba Leinu Latova, is on a Friday, and it's also a fast day. It's the only fast day that can occur on a Friday, Asar B'Teves. It's a short fast because it starts at like 5 and ends, at Kiddush. So you should make Kiddush on like a big glass of wine. You break your fast on that. That's nice, right? So it's the only fast day that can be done then. And also this year, the way Purim falls out is if you're in Israel, something called Purim Misholosh, but Erev Pesach is on Shabbos. So Pesach is Shabbos, is Erev Pesach, and then Sunday, Monday is Pesach. So it's one of those things where we daven very, very early on Erev Pesach because of the whole chametz and the egg matzah, flushing, you can't burn it, but all kinds of stuff that happen. It's a weird year. It'll happen again, I think, in 4 years, and then it won't happen again for another 20 some odd years. It's a weird calendar year, but of course, it had to be this year. No, why not 2020? But let's talk about Chanukah. So Chanukah, everybody loves Chanukah, right? Who doesn't love Chanukah? I hope everybody's enjoying so far. One of the things that always gets me is that, we're so excited, we lead up to it. And then before you know it, we're already like on the second half or in the back half of the menorah. It's like, boom, it just flies by. And where to go? What happened? And especially this year, because we can't celebrate like we normally would. One of the questions that's asked, and we've touched on it before, and I want to share with you a little bit more carefully. And one of the questions is, we have a Gemara Shiur every week. And our Gemara Shiur, we're learning Masechet Megillah, which virtually the entire tractate is dedicated to the story of the Megillah of Esther and the laws of Purim. And Purim has a lot of laws. You have to have a meal, and you have to give shalach manas, and how much do you have to give, and how many people, and you have to give money to the poor, and you have to hear the Megillah, you have to hear it at night, you have to hear it in the day. And what if you're in a walled city? What if you're not in a walled city? What if you're traveling from walled city to a non-walled city? And not to mention all the expounding of the passages in the Megillah. An entire tractate. It's called Masechet Megillah. What are the chances? Why is there no Masechet Chanukah? Chanukah, you could even argue, has far more complicated laws than Purim. We have to light. How many people have to light in the house? How many candles do I have to light? Well, I light this amount, that amount. How long does the light have to last? What time do I have to light the candles? What may I use for fuel for the candles? Can I use wax? Can I use oil? Can I use this? Can I use that? Somebody sent me a picture last night using avocado oil. Yafit, did you see this picture?
He's taking pictures. I'm like, who are you sending that to? He's like, you'll find out.
And there you have it. I didn't know there was such a thing as avocado oil. Okay. And then where do I place the menorah? And what do I do when it's Shabbos? And what do I do if I'm in more? All these laws, how high, how low, and there was not a single tractate called Chanukah. As a matter of fact, it only appears tangentially in Tractate Shabbos, Chaf Aleph Amud Beis, where the Gemara is discussing Bameh Madlika and with what can you light regular Shabbos candles. And while we're on the story, let's talk about my Chanukah. There's the story of the oil and the miracle and the victory and the war and the Gemara. Very little. It's like a couple of passages found in a couple of other places. But the main Gemara of Chanukah is a couple of pages that are found in Masechet Shabbos. I think it's a fair question. Why is there no tractate called Chanukah? I'll share with you 3 answers. And I think it's very, very telling and something that we should think about as we light the candles. The first answer was given by the Chassam Sofer. And this is my favorite answer of all time, just because it's just so clever and it's just, it just shows you that, the great sages were human also. So the Mishnah, which was redacted at around the year 200 of the Common Era, is redacted by Rabbi Yehuda Hanassi. Now, just to put it into context, the Chanukah story happens about 200 years before the destruction of the second Beis HaMikdash. By the way, the Purim story happens before the Chanukah story. It's important to know that. Purim happens before Chanukah because that's before the second Beis HaMikdash is rebuilt. The events of Purim lead to the rebuilding of the second Beis HaMikdash, with Ezra and Nehemiah going back, etc. Once they're already settled, the Greek Hellenists come, they infiltrate, and they disrupt the services in the temple, and the Hashmonaim, they go and they defeat them, and they put things back to normal up until the Romans come and take over, and then ultimately in the year 70 of the Common Era, they destroy the Beis HaMikdash. So they are year 70, year 135 is the fall of Beitar, so the whole Roman persecution is going all that time, and then it's not until about the year 200 where Rabbi Yehuda Hanassi takes the period of the Tanaim, the Tanaitic literature, and he decides that, we have no Beis HaMikdash, and before we lose sort of our connection to our essence, which is Torah, we better write some of this stuff down. Now, Mishnah, if anyone has ever studied Mishnah, just Mishnah, not Gemara, just Mishnah, Mishnah is very complicated. Mishnah, I've always said, is the original Twitter. Because remember Twitter, back in the day when Twitter, you kids don't remember this back when we started Twitter. No, when Twitter started, you could only have 140 characters. And there wasn't much you could say in 140 characters. Mishnah's like that. Mishnah gives you topic sentences, and you have to figure out the rest. And you have to derive, and that's what Gemara does. That's what Talmud does. So you have to click on a link and another page to see the whole article kind of thing. That's what Mishnah is versus Gemara. So when Rabbi Yehuda Hanassi, he's making all the tractates. He chooses deliberately, says the Chassam Sofer, not to have a tractate of Chanukah. Why? For very, very personal reasons. Rabbi Yehuda Hanassi traces his lineage back to the tribe of Yehuda, the tribe of Judah. And we're told in Parshas Vayechi, and the Ramban has a very long expose on this, where he says, where the Torah says, Lo Yasser Shevet Mi Yehuda, the kingship can only remain with the tribe of Judah. They're the ones who are kings. David HaMelech is from where? Yehuda. Shlomo, obviously, David, from Yehuda. The Hashmonaim, the Hasmonean, by the way, they were known as the Hasmonean kings. The Hasmoneans, what were the Hashmonaim? Right?
Kohanim.
Yochanan, Ben, right? They're Kohanim. He's been Yochanan Kohen Gadol. The Kohanim are the victors of the Chanukah story and the battle, and they remain in rule, and they establish themselves as kings. But the story, you see, we know the story. It's kind of like the end of the Esther story. The story doesn't end very well for them. The Hasmoneans end up becoming corrupt, intermarrying, mixing with the Idumeans, etc., etc., etc. So much so that the Gemara in Bava Basra says that if someone comes and tells you that they're from the house of Hashmonaim, they're lying. Means that they worked there once. They never actually, because they're gone. The line is completely disrupted. There are no more Hashmonaim. So Rabbi Yehuda Hanassi felt, he says, wait a minute. These Hashmonaim, they usurp the throne. They have no rights to the throne because the Torah says very clearly the throne can only go from the tribe of Yehuda and not from the tribe of Levi as their Kohanim. So to punish them or not to record this dastardly act, he decided not to include a tractate of Chanukah. Now, this is the Chassam Sofer says this, okay? It's very clever because it's like, okay, Rabbi Yehuda Hanassi took this personally. He was very zealous. He was takif. And is that nice? Or I don't know. So that's why other people don't like this answer. And other people say no, because you have to look at it in historical context, and that the Jewish people were now recovering from the Roman oppression around the time of the Mishnah. And the last thing they want to include is that, we're like warmongers. They were pacifists. Some people suggest that at the time of the Mishnah, the Jews were finally at a pacifist era, and they didn't want to seem like aggressors, certainly after what they have just experienced the last 200 years. So let's leave this part out. The story of Mordechai and Esther, they had the king's blessing, and everybody knows about that. It was Persian Media, and we're talking about a spiritual battle. It's okay. We're fine. You're good. I'm good. We're good. Like that. Okay. Again, it's not a great answer, but it's an answer. I'll share with you the answer of Rab Soloveitchik. That's all. Soloveitchik says that, and he makes the following comparison. Of course, he brings it through a halachic teaching, which I don't need to share with you right now. It's a little bit complicated, but he says that the basic difference is that let's say on Tisha B'Av. On Tisha B'Av, when we talk about the destruction of the Beis HaMikdash, what's the functional word that we use when we talk about the Tisha B'Av? We say remembering the fill in the blank.
Korban.
Thank you. Remembering, was that Vivian? Vivian, oh my gosh, you're amazing. I love it. Vivian is remembering the Churban. That's the functional word. Lacharov means to destroy, remembering the destruction of the temple, destruction of the Beis HaMikdash, Churban Beis HaMikdash, Churban. What's the functional word on the story of Chanukah? Is Tuma. Tuma, which is impurity. Is that they found that the Beis HaMikdash was defiled, and we had to find a way to purify it, and they didn't have this and the oil, and they found the oil. So if we look at the text, for instance, of Al Hanisim, and the text is, and by the way, it's always a good question to see which texts deal with the miracle of the oil versus the miracle of the battle. It says, when the wicked Greek kingdom rose up against your nation Israel, and what did they try to do? They wanted to obliterate the Torah. They wanted them not to follow the laws anymore. So what did you do, God, in the time of their need? Ravtas rivam dantos dinam nakamtas nikmasam. Try to say this without singing the Miami Boys Choir and song in your head. You fought their battles. You stood up for them. Whatever. But look what it says. Masarta. Giborim biad chaloshim, rabid biamiatim, tmeim biad tehorim, risham biad tzadikim, v'zedim biad azkeis. 5 descriptions here. You delivered the strong into the hands of the weak, the many into the hands of the few, the impure into the hands of the pure, the wicked into the hands of the righteous, and the wanton into the hands of the diligent students of your Torah. Why didn't it just say, Rishoim biad tzadikim? Or, good guys beat the bad guys. Why all these descriptions? So Rav Soloveitchik says that because the functional word is tuma, and the main source of tuma, of defilement or of impurity that the Jewish people had to deal with was from their own ranks. Because it wasn't the Greeks came in and imposed their culture. The Greeks infiltrated the Jewish culture. And they said, yeah, no, you could be Jewish, but you also, think about worshiping the body and the Olympics. And all of a sudden, they didn't say you can't learn Torah. No, you don't need Rosh Chodesh. You don't need Bris Milah. You don't need Shabbos. They always had a few things. Slowly but surely, they infiltrated into society, accepted the Jewish people as part of their own until they became these Syrian, Hellenist, Greek, Syrian, whatever. There are lots of places involved here. Syrian, Greeks. The Hellenists, the biggest, they were called the Misyavnim. They are the ones that tried to get the Jewish people to worship less or to observe less and follow more of Greek culture. Okay? Now, by the way, who are these Misyavnim? They were Jews. They were Jews. That's why we have so many descriptions here. The few Jews in the hands of the many Jews who were going against them. The greater and the smaller, the weaker and the stronger. Zaydim biad oskei soresecha. Those who abandon your Torah versus those who were following the Torah. Rav Soloveitchik says that because of this, we're not going to publicize this. We're not going to air our dirty laundry and make an entire tractate about a Jew versus Jew episode. By the way, it's a great book that was written a number of years ago called Jew versus Jew. And it discusses many different episodes, and really in our times, of times when Jews fought against Jews. I mean, you could probably write an encyclopedia on that. But because this episode reflected a less than proud moment in the history of our people, that's why Rav Soloveitchik says that's why it's not incorporated. Because we incorporate it, people are going to look at it, it's like, what do you guys, sometimes, and it doesn't mean that we sweep it under the carpet. It just means we're not going to draw extra attention and create an entire tractate about it. It is important to know, though, that Chanukah, since we're mentioning Churban, ironically, it's Chanukah and it's Tisha B'Av and Shavas and Tammuz and all the fast days, which deal with Churban, are the only holiday, if you want to call those fast days holidays, Tisha B'Av is called a Moed, that actually take place in Israel. All the other holidays take place outside of Israel. Purim happens in Babylonia, right? It happens in Persia. Right by the Natanz nuclear reactor. That's where the Purim story is. And where is Pesach? Egypt. Shavuos in the desert. Sukkot in the desert. All the holidays are outside of Israel. Chanukah in Israel. Chanukah, where? Focusing on the Beis HaMikdash, on the temple worship. Churban, Tisha B'Av, Beis HaMikdash. Always thinking about the future. The future, always thinking about things that happen. So, and I'll leave you with one great insight I saw again from Rav Soloveitchik. Soloveitchik says that in the story of the Akedah, when Avraham is walking, you remember that fun story when he was about to kill his own son? Yeah, it was a good one, right? So when he's walking with Yitzchak and also ostensibly with Yishmael and Eliezer. So they get to a certain point, let's say the bottom of the mountain. He turns to the two lads and he says, Shavu lachem po im hachamor. He says, you guys stay, like you watch the car, Vani v'hanar nelcha ad ko. And he says, and the lad and I, Yitzchak and I, we're going to go there. Like you stay here in base camp, you watch the stuff, we're going to go, we'll be back. It says, and it says, v'nashuv alechem, we're going to come back to you. So Soloveitchik says that's what the pasuk is indicating to us is a difference in worldview. He says the rest of the world, their whole view is yeshvu po. It's all about the here and the now. Am Yisrael, we're always thinking ad ko. We're thinking about where we're heading. Where is it that we're going to go? Where is it that we have to be? And he says, and the Hasidim point out, by the way, that it's no secret that ad ko chaf hey, 25, is a reference to Chanukah, which is on the 25th of Kislev. Because we're always thinking Chanukah is all about rebuilding the Beis HaMikdash. When are we going to get back to the service? When are we going to have things like they used to be? Rav Soloveitchik got a great line. He said, the future is defined by the present. The future is defined by what we're doing now, because everything we're doing is geared towards the future. Why do we make ourselves meshugah about our kids and getting involved in shul and getting involved in schools and getting involved in community causes and philanthropy? Because we want to make sure that there's a future for our kids. We want to make sure our grandkids have somewhere to go, that there's going to be Yiddishkeit for them, because that's us. We're nelcha ad ko. The rest of the world is all po versus ko. That's it. So that's what the beauty of Chanukah is. And he says, even though that there's some less than glorious parts about it, is the fact that, this led to a tremendous avla. It was really what we've been studying between Mincha and Marav, we're learning the Sfarim of Rav Melamed. And Rav Melamed writes there that even though that there actually were many, many observances that were held, victories and all these things that were held after the period of the Chashmonaim, but because of their descent into spiritual lowliness and then ultimately extinction, Chazal decided they only would keep one of those observances, which is the lighting of the Chanukah menorah, because of that miracle was so great, and we publicize it. But it's one of those things where, we publicize it, we don't draw attention to some of the other stuff, because if you would keep reading the story, by the way, very similar to the story of Purim, we've discussed many times, it's like when the story of Purim ends, what happened? Do they all go home and live happily ever after? No. Esther, the Bis Yaakov Meidel, she's still in the palace, living with this king. She's a Jewish girl with a non-Jewish king. She has a kid with him. Yeah, she saved Judaism. She saved the Jews. But you know what? Nebuch. She can't get Chalav Yisrael there. Right? So what are you going to do? So we don't draw attention to that. We're very good. By the way, Jews are very good at not drawing attention to certain things. We don't like discussing our own shortcomings. We have to recognize them. But when it comes to, let's say, nationally producing, this is what you tell everybody. Chanukah, it's great. The oil is amazing. We're so great. Yeah. What happened after that? I don't know. When was it? I don't know. I don't know. So it's a funny thing. It's a funny thing. That's why we sit and we learn carefully. We learn text. We read, observe. When you say Al Anisim next, pay attention to that, and you recognize that the function of Tumah versus Tahara, impurity versus purity, as opposed to, let's say, pure destruction or physical or spiritual. That's very, very different. So that's Rav Soloveitchik's point. So again, we have a few nights left of Chanukah. I hope that everybody has an enjoyable Chag. I'm glad that we could learn together, because the most important thing we have to do in Chanukah is to learn Torah when they wanted to take Torah away from us. And what we do specifically is to learn and study Torah. That's the best victory that we could have. So everybody enjoy, especially Nancy in sunny Florida. Mom's jealous of you. And yeah, have a great Chag.